Members present, Paul Jensen, Brian Parks, Paul Bixler, Michael Todd, myself, Mark Aguirre. Paul, Mr. Jensen, if you could lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Sure.
And just so, before we get started, just so everyone knows, this is going to be really informal. As Dr. Schuff and administration start to go through everything, if there's something that you have a question on and we need to stop, please raise your hand. Ask that question. Or if there's confusion or you've heard something, please, this is what this is for, is to get all of that out of the way and for us as a board and administration in the room to hear your concerns or your pros or your cons on this. So Dr. Schuff, if you could.
Welcome everyone. I want to first just acknowledge in the room, certainly our governing board members being here, but also in the audience, I know there's a few people here who have participated on the four-day school week committee. So would you just either stand up or wave your hand if you participated with us in the committee work, so the board can see. Great, thank you. And then out of people here today, raise your hand if you are a parent of a child in our district, a parent of a child in our district, right? If you are a teacher in our district, okay? A support staff member, good? And a school or district administrator. All right, just wanted our governing board to see who's with us here this evening. Let's see. This is, okay, this really isn't working, guys. Can you put it back to slide 1? It's not working. All right, now you all have a stroke from you could tell us the reason why we would say that. All right, well, let me just start by showing you, we start out with really a great number of people, from parents, support staff, administrators, teachers who participated in the committee at least one of the 4 meetings, and even one community member that wasn't related to any of those things. And over the course of 4 weeks, we started this work in July. You can see the topics, I won't read them to you. Our most recent meeting was back on September 21st. And so now we're coming together to just share with you an overview of all the pros and cons primarily and some of the big ideas that emerge from this. And just get your feedback on that. And also encourage all of you, before you finish tonight, if you haven't, to be sure you take the survey, and we've got QR codes. So I'll be saying that about 3 times this evening. All right. The committee over time, with each one of those categories, they developed more guiding principles that would guide the work. And you can see here, these are some of the important ideas to consider as factors for decision-making, recommendations, and overall designing what might be a potential 4-day model for the governing board to consider. And then the white ones are the ones the committee did review, and then these kind of came out of our final conversation in the meeting with around budget. And the last 2 were certainly, the committee didn't do this, but certainly a factor will be for our governing board to consider the survey data of both parents and staff. And then also considering what would be the impact to enrollment, because that's also an impact to budget and resources to be able to serve our children. Okay. The educational impact, if you looked at some of the materials online that the committee studied, we collected just a collection from the committee members themselves and us. What were some of the research articles that were out there? We know that there are journal articles out there, and that's not quite the same as actual research that's conducted in a research study, and preferably peer-reviewed articles. There aren't a great number out there, but there are some. And it's a growing research, so I think you can continue to watch that and see more and more come about, because more and more school districts are now undertaking this, and more people have an interest in the actual research behind it. And basically what we found with that research, I hate to generalize so much, but overall it really had more to do with the instructional hours and how you could, as much as possible, keep those instructional hours the same as what you already are offering in your school district. And if you were able to do that, you were more likely to be able to maintain the same level of student learning. There were, of course, some studies that said you were slightly worse off by going to a 4-day week, or not growing achievement as fast as those in a 5-day program. Some that said no effect, and then some that actually saw an improved effect. So it's really in different places. So I would encourage you to read what's on the district website for this educational impact. Curriculum and assessment, we wondered as a committee, what might that impact be? And as we delved into that, we recognized that you are having shorter weeks, but still you have longer days. So it really ends up that the curriculum itself, that's the pacing of what the standards that we want our children to learn over time, it really then becomes this proportional model. So I think overall we found that the curriculum, assessment, those kinds of things really aren't as impacted by the 4-day week as we thought they might be. Special area, certainly that can be impacted, but that really is going to be impacted more from our passing our district override and the ability to have funding. And the more funding we have available gives us the opportunity for increased instructional minutes for our children in art, music, and PE. And those are what at risk right now with the election. Assessment, the same thing. Really, it just becomes a proportion thing. We've got longer days, so we can still accomplish our assessment cycle in the same schedule. Special education, again, the same thing. It's kind of a proportionate thing. So these, I think, were probably surprising to us and to the committee, that not seeing a big difference there, but would see some concerns that people had around in the area of instruction, noticing that we really need to maintain an urgency for how we use our instructional time, but we also have an obligation to do that right now anyway. We have a 5-day schedule. All right, so instructional time, we really dug into this from just a mathematical perspective. This is our current 5-day schedule, 7 hours per week. In the red oval, 1,134 hours is how much time the district provides our students, kindergarten through 8th grade. In the column just to the left of the red oval are the state required minimum hours. And keep in mind, that's a minimum, right? So if we were to reduce down to that minimum, we really are then, from the research showing us, that we would be at risk of decreasing student learning, student achievement. But you can see as right now, the district is well above the minimum requirements. We currently go to school for 178 days, 4 of which are parent-teacher conference days, and 37 are early release days of that. So we looked as a committee, we looked at 8 hours, we looked at 7.5 hours, we looked at 7 hours. We just tried some major increments just to get a feel for how that could work. We paid attention to then what's the impact of the amount of teacher time that's left over beyond what they're doing bell to bell, and paid attention to that. And so as a committee, we really were looking at the 7.5 hour is where it made the most sense for the committee. And from here is where the district and governing board could do some tweaking of that if we wanted to just somehow get a little bit more time that makes it a little closer approximation to what we're offering right now with instructional hours without going to a full 8 hours, because we found that didn't actually work mathematically with the time allotments that we had for teachers and administrators. So when we look at it from a 7.5 hour day, We had a 147-day schedule, 1,097 hours, and then that equates to 37 less hours of instruction per school year, moving to a 4-day week with this kind of a model. So from there, after the committee was finished, we started playing with, well, what would it take to get it closer to 0? And so there are some options for that, or we could stick with a 37-hour difference. One of the things we also paid attention to was that on Monday through Friday, in a 5-day schedule, there are minutes in the school day that aren't usable for instruction. Kids eat lunch, kids go to recess, kids have passing time, they have morning announcements. So we aren't learning during that time. So Monday through Thursday on a 4-day schedule, that remains the same. But what is different on a Friday is that essentially 1 hour per day, 1 hour, 1 hour per day, once every Friday, would have been not usable time anyway. So in some ways you could add back 36 hours and we're coming really close to the same amount of instructional hours. That's 36 weeks in a school year, an hour per week for every Friday that wasn't usable of the amount of time we had in a 5-day week anyway. That gets you a little bit closer back. So you could consider that, or you want to look at just a straight model of exactly how many hours, you could ignore that aspect. So some other schedules that the committee didn't look at that could come a little bit closer is if we have 2 early release days, 146 days, and we have 7 hours and 30 minutes, but we have 148 days, there's one more day, now we're within 30 hours. So play with it again, and you can say, well, what if it was 7 hours and 40 minutes for 148 days? Now we have a difference of 5 hours, and that's not even counting that 36 hours per year that's unusable on a Friday anyway. So you can just see by looking at some of these, you can get a little bit closer to the same instructional hours and overcome the obstacle of what could negatively impact student learning, at least to the best extent possible. So this will be something that if it goes forward, our governing board will look at of really deciding and narrowing down to what will be the exact model if it goes forward. All right, this is a calendar which you can't see, but on the, from far away, but how the committee and the administration looked at this and said, all right, well, what happens on the Fridays? Because we've got the students go to school Monday through Thursday, somewhere between 7.5 hours a day to 7 hours and 40 minutes. So we know what's happening with the children. And then what is happening with our staff? And so we started to look at, particularly starting with teachers. So we've got the red and blue days, and we said if it kind of splits up between 74 days the first half of the year, 74 days the second half of the year. And what it does with the Fridays off, because of some of the Monday holidays, it gives families and it gives staff 3 times a year when there's actually a 3-day school week. So that means it's a 4-day extended weekend because of the Monday off and the Friday. So just letting you see what that looks like. And then the red and blue are showing that for our teachers, 18 of the Fridays would be off for them to be flexibly used how they want to use those Fridays off, and 16 of the days would be days for professional learning, much like they're doing right now with early release every Wednesday, and then the 2 full-day district in-services that the district has now, which we would no longer have. So we would no longer have early releases for professional learning, and we would no longer have full-day in-services. So this was kind of the lengthy list of pros and cons. So I'm going to just let you read through those, and I'll highlight just a couple of them. And then we'll just give you a little think time to see if you had any comments, questions around what is the impact for learning. So I think I've noted several of them. Overall, considering a pro curriculum, assessment, those things are not expected to be impacted with depending on how we model the number of days and the hours per day, we can minimize the impact to student learning, but it is still a risk. There are articles out there that still say that is a risk. On the con side, ones could say that right now when children go to school Monday through Friday, it's a shorter day and they have more, the stamina was a concern of the committee. So not wanting to make those school days too long, Monday through Thursday in a model, because they were worried about the stamina of both teachers and students. And also concerned that sometimes the mornings might be the best learning time for kids, maybe not middle school, but the other children. And so when you're taking away a morning time of a Friday, so that came up in the conversation. But overall, this is not where we saw the biggest concerns coming from the committee on pros and cons. Any comments from any of you or questions about the academic learning for kids? Professional development is important for our staff. The bulk of the educational research says that the more effective a teacher is what makes the most difference in student learning for our children. So our opportunities with our staff, professional learning isn't just, say, workshop time where they're learning something new. It is also their collaboration time where they are planning together to have high quality experiences for children. They're designing assessments to make sure that children are learning and making progress, as much progress as possible. And they're studying that data and they're designing interventions or extensions for the children to make sure that every child is making the growth they need. And that happens during our professional learning time. So one of the guiding principles was that try to not impact that as little as possible. And so then we started to say, how would they model that? So we counted up the number of hours in the day that the teacher would be working. So right now in our 5-hour day, they are bell to bell, it's 7 hours, but with an additional 45 minutes, which is showing as 0.75 of the hour, with an additional 45 minutes before and after school because they're expected to be there for maybe an IEP meeting, maybe a teacher meeting after school, a parent-teacher conference, or just covering supervision duties. So we know that there's that time. We know that teachers spend way more than that, extensively more than that, but that's the expected time, kind of bell to bell plus some that we are expected as part of their week. We don't take off for, it's a working lunch, even though they give a 30-minute duty-free lunch, we still consider that a working lunch. And then if you take that across and you can see with a 4-day week, the number of hours is less. And what that does is that then gives teachers more flexibility for the remaining hours. The United States is one of several countries that have far less time for teachers that's considered flexible or unstructured time. And some of the countries that do very well, like Finland, have far less structured time for the teachers, and they get very good results. So we know that that can be a benefit for our teachers. So then we just added that up mathematically and said how much time is left over available for professional learning and how much time remains as their time on a Friday because they're working longer days. Right? And so we put that together, as I said before, comes out to be 16 professional days and then 18 teacher-directed days to do their planning, anything else they might choose to do. But they also could flexibly make doctor's appointments during that time. Could take an extended weekend, so it's not an actual structured work time for that flexible time. So there were some pros and cons with this. The opportunities for uninterrupted time for planning on Fridays or any other time that they would choose. When they have a 35-minute prep, they sometimes get started with something and then can't finish it. autonomy, much more flexibility for them to choose what they want to work on, and if they want to do it collaboratively or if they want to do it independently. It gives them that choice of that. We heard from several teachers that when they do early release professional learning and collaboration after the school day on Wednesday and students are released, they're not as fresh as they would be if they started fresh at the beginning of the day. So they might get more out of it that way. And overall, just mental health, quality, work-life balance was the biggest factor I think we heard, and just this overall thought that if you can provide more work-life balance to teachers at a time when we can't pay them and keep up with inflation, that's a different way that you could provide that opportunity for teachers. Cons is this model would be 12 hours less professional development time, but I do think that people thought it was relatively comparable, so that wasn't really a real strong negative on that standpoint. A concern that teachers also would need childcare on the Fridays if they're expected to be in professional learning on those Fridays, so that is something to perhaps overcome. And there, some concern that if some of the weekly professional learning that happens wouldn't be as consistent if it was bi-weekly. But I think people generally thought that still could be something that could be overcome. Childcare. This impacts both teachers and parents. Currently, our LEAP program, we offer it 5 days a week, before and after school, essentially at 6:30 a.m. to 6:30 p.m., and then just cut out in the middle for when the kids are in school. Every Wednesday early release, we offer that. That's a total of 27 hours compared to if we're trying to make a comparable LEAP model, then it would be AM, PM, before and after school 4 days a week. And then every Friday, we would still be offering 6:30 to 6:30. So we modeled it as close to what parents are already getting. And if that becomes too expensive for parents, another option that we could work with parents who are interested in LEAP, then we could work with them to say, well, what happens if we were to shorten the time period we provided services, say on Fridays, then that could bring the cost down. So it's really a cash controlled budget dependent on who enrolls and pays tuition, and then the number of staff that's required for those students to be licensed for childcare. We looked at, for Monday through Thursday, keeping the schools the same, and then on Fridays, narrowing it down to 2 sites. Right now, looking at, a school in the north and a school in the south to make it more convenient for families. Because it is an increase in hours, it does require an increase in staff. Fridays are a little harder to schedule because then we have to schedule lunch, and so you have to have double up in your staffing. So it does expect that the cost could go from as much as $330 to as much as $455 monthly. That's average about $3.60 an hour for childcare, but some families don't need all the hours that we make available, but we have to make it all available because we have to staff it consistently. So we think, overall, those are just some of the big ideas there. And then here are some pros and cons that the committee came up with. Overall, an alternate option for parents to provide a child care model, but overall concerns that the cost may be an issue, and if there's a great demand for it, we may not be able to find enough staff members to staff as much as the demand is out there for. So we'll have to, that's an unknown for us. All right, so I'm going to stop there. I talked about professional development. I talked about child care and potential concern for working families. Any comments there or questions? Will you come to the mic? Just other people will listen to it afterwards. Thank you. No, right here, right here. Oh, It's okay. It's just us here in the room.
Okay. So this is gonna be a plan, like in the future, or this is just gonna happen, no matter what everybody thinks about this one, or what is this?
You know, I missed a very important point at the beginning. This is a model that we are considering, and we are working hard to get everybody's input on what they would like to do. So the committee had to really dive in and look at all the factors that would impact this, and pros and cons. And now, by listening to all of you, our governing board will have the difficult decision of saying, yes, we should do this next year, or no, we should not do this next year.
Yeah.
Because unfortunately, a lot of parents, we work both parents, and then we work Monday through Friday, including weekends. Already, I'm gonna do my personal, so I have to pay for early school. I have to pay early relief. So how much I have to pay to, now with this, So, and no, I don't pay only for one child. I pay for two childs. So okay, that's gonna be stressful for a lot of people. Okay.
Drive our buses that do serve children food in the cafeteria. They might be our paraprofessionals that help our teachers and help our children in special education classrooms. And we know that if we go from 5 days a week to 4 days a week, that's going to impact those people with potentially, depending on how we schedule them going forward. Do we schedule them with less hours, or do we try to schedule with them with the same hours but now in 4 days? Or do we take the extra money and do we pay them higher wages during the 4 days so it doesn't impact them? There's a lot of decisions around what should we do in a model for a support staff approach. And the committee looked at this information. Mr. Nuttall, our Assistant Superintendent for Support Services, he individually gathered information from individual employees and then collectively put that all together in some survey information. And what we learned from both the transportation and the food service is that certainly they are not in favor of anything that's going to cut their hours that they would work, because that's how much they earn throughout the year. They also are concerned that if they cut their hours, now they may not qualify for insurance benefits, and that is harmful to them as employees. And then we were really asking them questions like, if you had a reduction, would you consider working for 24 hours per week without benefits? And you see the big red bar, and that really means no. They say no. Would you consider working for 24 hours only if the district still provided the benefits? Yes was a little stronger, but still primarily in the red, the no. Food service, we looked at some pros and cons with them. It's mostly on the con side for food service. And that is because, again, food service is, the budget comes from kids buy lunch. That money pays for the food and it pays for the staff. And so when you have less lunches purchased, 20% less lunches purchased, then it harms the ability to pay as many hours for the staff, and also it impacts the kinds of food that the budget can then allow in there. So things like the Roving Chef Farmers Market program, some of the extra fruits and vegetables like the salad bar, some of those specialty things that our food service currently offers may be at risk with a 20% less budget. Overall, even if we add 15 cents per meal, both breakfast and lunch, to the cost of the meals, we still anticipate around a $40,000 shortfall of budget even if you take away, you're buying less food because it's 20% and you're paying less staff, we still feel like this would probably end up with a shortfall in budget with food service. Ask the food service people the same questions. Would you work without benefits? What if it was 24 hours and the district provided benefits? Very similar to our transportation. So that raised concerns about our ability to recruit new staff members or retain the ones we have for support staff, because they perceive it having a negative impact if their hours and benefits were cut. So we took that same concept and we said, well, what if we modeled our budget in 3 different ways? One way is to say, all right, let's save the most money we can. So if we're going to implement this 4-day school week, can that save the district money? And that was an important consideration because you know right now there's a budget override election that's on November 8th, or people will be getting their mail-in ballots very soon. And on the ballot is to pass the override or not to pass the override. And if the override doesn't pass, that's an additional $1 million the district has to cut for this next school year. So in some people's mind, being a good stewards of the dollars, if we cut 20% of the days and cut some of those support staff hours, the fuel for transportation, and maximize that, that's in Model 1. So when you look through and see some of the options I'm going to show you with the dollars, some of you in the back may want to come up here. Model 1 is try to get the most savings as possible. Model 2 says, let's prioritize our staff so we don't lose our bus drivers, because if we don't have bus drivers, we can't offer transportation services. So as an example, so how could we minimize the impact on staff? Try to keep as much as possible their hours closer to what they currently have now, and try to minimize that, but still take some savings, maybe a little bit of savings on utilities. The savings you would get on the fuel for the buses on Fridays that you don't have to pay any longer. And maybe some hours are shortened, but perhaps you're not losing their benefits. So it's minimizing that. So that's option 2. And option 3 is saying, basically, any savings you got from that, try to put that back into the employees. Maybe it turns out that they work less hours, but maybe they make more money per hour, and we kind of minimize that impact as much as possible for employees. So the 1, biggest savings, all the way to 3, not really worried about savings, mostly worried about retaining and recruiting our employment for support staff. So we looked at it from all these different groups: support staff, front office staff, guest teachers, 12-month district staff. Just tried to say, everybody's schedule, would everybody go to a 4-day week? Would it go to the teacher's schedule of 4 days per week and every other Friday, mostly? Or would some people still stay on a 5-day schedule? Like perhaps that's better for maintenance staff because they can get into the classrooms and make repairs when the children aren't there. It's probably better for them to stay on a 5-day week. So we talked with all these employee groups to ask them about this. And then we looked out and said, Model 1, take the most savings possible, all the way to 3, take the least amount of savings, but some savings you would still get. And we budgeted for each one of these groups of people that are employed by the district. Keep in mind that most of our budget for maintenance and operation is tied up in the cost of staffing, compensation, and benefits. So an example of where we thought you might not see a budget savings is on guest teachers. It's still approximately the same amount, the same number of people take the same number of days. It might not be a difference. It could be modeled differently, but that was an example. School front office staff is another example. If we just took off 1 whole day, it could save $71,000. If we try to save their hours and there's more work to be done, they're just doing more of it before and after school and some longer days, then you might not save as much money. So here's another example. Utilities. The savings on utilities is probably about the same across all models, but custodial services, we could save money by taking off the Fridays. But another consideration is we don't get daily cleaning service. We're not paying for daily cleaning service right now, and probably be better not to cut that any more than it already is and to still keep paying for it. So that's why Model 2 and Model 3 don't see a budget savings there. Overall staffing, non-staffing, seeing the differences there. For transportation, transportation's tricky. It's got some complicated funding formulas. If the funding formulas stay as they are, we aren't as concerned about the revenue part of it, but there was some talk in the legislature the last couple of years that may surface again, and then it could end up being detrimental. But for right now, we think that may keep us equal. And overall, Model 1 is where you're seeing, for transportation, cut to their hours and compensation. Model 2 and Model 3 are really about the fuel savings of a 4-day week. Food service, here's an example, the same thing. Staffing, more of a cut versus less of a cut. Food supplies stays the same through all three models. And then the meal price increase adds a little bit of dollars back to help the budget a little bit. LEAP, very little difference here because again it's just controlled by staffing and what's offered. The biggest concern is what the cost will be to parents. Put that all together, if we cut as much as possible up to the 20%, you can see a savings up to $757,000, perhaps. Other districts who have implemented this, the research shows that they get about a 5% budget savings, with their overall. But this is our best modeling that we can see with it. Model 2, $278,000. Model 3, $130,000. And does not include LEAP and food service because those are cash-controlled accounts. Some of the pros and cons. It's possible that some of our support staff might like the flexibility of shorter week, and then the con certainly is it reduces the hours and compensation, childcare costs, retention. Overall, you're looking at really budget savings versus retention recruitment. Those are the really big ideas that are kind of weighing both directions. The same really is true for Model 2. You get some budget savings. It's some comparable types of things. And then Model 3, very limited financial impact to employees. The pro is we might have more stable services for children, like in food service and transportation, more stability for our families, getting buses to school and such. And then some negative things. Negative would be no cost savings, essentially, Model 3, or minimal. And then the final thing on the budget side is we don't really know what the impact of this will be. There were people in the committee that thought, hey, we might actually recruit more families who are interested in a 4-day week, and they may come to our district. And certainly the concern that we'll have to be aware of is what is the impact if families choose to not stay in the district if the district goes to a 4-day week and they go someplace else. With them, that funding then goes to another district, and there's less funding available for the district at a time when we're trying to pass an override and the impact of that potential budget cut. So it's something that we'll have to be aware of. And so how we will model that in our understanding is 1%, if 1% of the families, of the students, go someplace else, then that's a potential loss of about $280,000. If 5% go, $1.4 million is at risk. And so what we'll do is, with our survey, we've asked our families, would you be somewhat likely or very likely to go to take your child to another district, and that percentage will help us to understand mathematically what's a potential budget impact. We recognize that all the people who say they're very likely to go somewhere else won't actually go, but we know that some of them will, and so we'll have to model that financially to see what that impact would be. So I'm going to stop and let you ask some questions or comments about the impact for support staff, the services for children through support staff, and or your thoughts on the budget, because if this was implemented, the governing board has to decide, are they going to go the most budget savings possible or the least, and then and focus on support staff retention. So we'd like to hear from you on some of these ideas. You have to come to the mic, I'm sorry, just because we're recording this.
Sorry, more of a question. So do you know how many, like pulling from that, the surveys that have come in, do you know what the majority of people are leaning to right now, or no, because surveys are still coming in?
I would say, generally speaking, it goes up and down depending on if we get a new influx of surveys coming in. But it's been right around 60% of parents being in favor of it, and around 70%, plus or minus 4, the same both direction for staff.
Okay, so since this is for this whole school district, sorry, it's technically 2 questions. If we were to pull our kids, just hypothetically speaking, how easy would it be to go to another school, or would other schools be flooded with, 60% you're saying, so it wouldn't be a ton, but that, I still feel like that's a lot. So would there be a likelihood that they could even be accepted into another school?
Oh, so I'll answer it in a couple parts.
Okay.
So the other question we asked was, the second part was how likely would you be to take your children? So you may not have been in favor of it, but you'd still say, but I'll still bring my kids, right? And then you have maybe around 10%, it's been fluctuating between 9 and 12%, said they would be very likely to go someplace else. So if you say, all right, we'll take half of that. And then we say, all right, if half of 10 is 5%, then that would be the impact, $1.4 million. So we just don't have really any real way of knowing what will happen with that. So the second part of your question is, what's the capacity of other places to take them? So in other districts that have implemented this, like Casa Grande, Wickenburg, Saddle Mountain, and Tonopah, all of those, there were very limited options. There weren't charter schools around. There aren't next door districts close by unless they're driving their children in when they come in to work downtown or something. So they didn't see much of an enrollment increase or decrease. Cartwright School District did see a decrease by about 1,200 students. They're a pretty big school district, but that was also impacted by several new charter schools opening up. So it's hard to get a read on what was other people's experience to help us to know how to predict this impact. So that's kind of all we have for now. Yes. Okay, I cannot go backwards. We've already established this. We only go forward in this district. There's no going backwards. All right, show of hands. Okay, remember 1 was save the most money possible. 3 was try to not have it impact the staff at all and maintain. And 2 wasn't really quite in the middle, but it was a little more savings, but still supporting staff. So show me, you got to put your fingers up in the air. 1, 2, or 3, and everybody has to put their fingers up. Everybody, even the kids. Okay, keep that up there, and if I said, and this next year we have to cut $1 million because there's no art, music, PE, and full-day kindergarten is at risk, would you change your answer to a 1? Anybody? Is that the question you would have, Paul? Okay. Okay. Thank you. And do you have a question? Do you want to say? No, you're all good. You have to come to the mic. I'm sorry, that's the only rule. Either one.
Okay, good evening. I am speaking from some previous experience. I came from a 4-day school, and I can tell you for the first time in the 7 years that I taught in public, moving to a charter school, having that flexibility on that last day really changed how I took my professional development towards my students. It was all devoted to them, and the planning time really changed and motivated our mindset when it came to that. Because no longer did we have to spend the weekends after the Fridays and during the week to actually, commit to our families and things like that. I understand, the daycare and everything, I understand that, but just from a professional aspect, I also had my son in the school, and having that 3-day break, it really made a difference, because no longer did we see all those absences for the early, holidays starting early, whether it's, even Labor Day, things like that, taking that longer week off. My only concern with having that model, and, of course it worries me about the override and not having the specials and literally having the kids all day, that personally stresses me out a little bit. I'm not alone on that, but I only speak for myself. But having that time to really engage and be caught up, because as a teacher you want to impact your students the most with the time that you have, and to use our time as well. So I personally come from that, and just making sure that that Friday time doesn't turn into a slow movement into more PDs and meetings and things like that, and leaving it to that professional development, because that's where we best dedicate our kids with our creativity and being able to follow through on the most impactful lessons that we can provide for our kids. That's all.
Thank you. Mike?
So with the parents in the room, the question that I have is, going to a 4-day school week, obviously that one day, I'm just like you, working family. Is that what keeps you from wanting to go to a 4-day, is having to come up with a way to find childcare for that one day? For just the parents, is there a show of hands that is the driving factor? Okay, thank you.
So can I say it a different way? Raise your hand if childcare would be a concern to you if we went to a 4-day week. Would you be concerned about that? You still have other childcare before and after school you have to pay for already, even with a 5-day week. All right, so, yes, go ahead.
Hello. Okay. Is there a possibility, because I know like when there's a holiday on a Monday, like now it's turned into a 3-day, school week for them. And I feel like sometimes that can be hard on them as educational wise. Is there a possibility that maybe on that holiday on a Monday that they would be open on a Friday, like to kind of stretch out where they're still getting that 4-day work, like school week, being closed on a Monday for a holiday? Does that make sense?
It does. So we have a certain number of days contractually with our teachers, and then we have some rules around that are considered state holidays, so we don't have a choice but to give it Monday. So if we have them off on the Monday, but we make them come on Friday, we've taken away the state holiday. So we may not be able to do that, but some of the models that you see up here did completely minimize or eliminate, depending which one, the early releases. So talking with Cartwright superintendent, many families in that community in Maryville, economically disadvantaged families, They found that their parents, it was a real struggle for them to get off work to come pick their children up for early release, and that harmed them in their ability to work in their employment. And they preferred to have the full day off because that was easier to take them to Nana's house and be there all day and didn't have to drive back and forth to pick them up. That was a more urban community, which may be a little more like us than, say, someplace like Tonopah, for comparison. But there also were other options in that community for Boys and Girls Club and for YMCA. So there are other options besides just our LEAP program for families. So we're really trying to listen to, are there other options for families, and how would this impact you all if it went to 4 days?
I served on the committee, and so one of the things
Speaking to the mic.
one of the things too that we looked at with that was what would have less impact if we went and we took Mondays off instead of Fridays, and we found that Monday had the minimal impact. So I wanted to add that because that was, I think, helped her maybe a little bit too. It's less impact if we took Fridays and not Monday.
Some of the things the committee looked at was our student absenteeism. Which day of the week do we have the most student absences? Fridays. Which day of the week do we have the most teacher absences? Fridays. Now, will Fridays, the Thursdays become the new Fridays? I hope not. But there's that was taken into because why not? And I originally thought my mindset was like another school district had done. They did the Mondays, and I'm thinking, great, just like you, Tuesday through Friday. But they still had to arrange for some of the holidays, and this is just how it worked out. So it was a consideration to do the Mondays instead of Fridays, but the committee really solidly landed. That wasn't one that seemed to be iffy, more than one option with them, at least in their recommendation. So again, I would just say, yes, come to the mic. Again, I would say this is not a model that the district is pushing out. It really came about as a possible idea around budget impact. How could we have budget savings? And when we surveyed our parents and staff early on this last spring, there was enough interest, regardless of whether it got budget savings or not, that it made us want to at least study it more. So our job has been since July to study this, to gather information, and now to have these public forums and surveys to listen to people what they want to do.
Sorry, I promise. Last question. So
As many as you want.
It looks like, and what I have been studying and trying to group together, I'm all for helping the teachers and staff as much as possible, and I don't want to add to their load without increasing pay. But looking at all of the data, it looks like we're just looking at school funds, what we would gain or lose or maintain. Are we at all looking at the effect of the children? And from districts that have gone to 4 day a week, has that affected them negatively at all because they don't have that midweek early out? Has there been any pros and cons with studies of kids?
Yes. So let's just first say our mission, why we even exist as an organization, is to educate children. So we have to take that very seriously of any potential harm. So remember, I started out the conversation with sharing with you the link to all the research articles you could go view. The committee started with that in mind. What would be the educational impact? To the best that we could predict based on the research, that if we can come as close to zero difference in hours, that would give us the best chance of having zero difference of educational impact. So that's why we were considering all those instructional hours. Okay, so I'm going to ask you a hard question. If you just had to say yes or no, raise your hand if you would say yes to moving to a 4 day school week next year. We haven't heard from you. Can you come to the mic and say why? Either one of you.
No, I just think it would be beneficial for the kids. I was more partial to Mondays for them because I think that have a higher impact for them, especially because, Mondays are always the hardest days for them. But just still having that 3 day, time to be off of school, I think will make, the 4 days they're in school more impactful. And then also the same thing, like, I think it was you made the point about, of course the teachers work on the weekends. There's no way that they can do what they do, without working on the weekends. So I think having that extra day, they can do what they have to do, and, then they have their time, that work-life balance. So I think that's important.
Great. Ms. Gonzalez, we haven't heard from you. Would you like to say something?
Does teacher retention and staff retention, and maybe even recruitment, that teachers and additional staff would want to come into the district, so in other words, we have more bodies available in this district, would that play into your decision of going to a 4-day?
Well, it's a decision that I have to personally make, but I'm ready to retire. And the freedom to be a little bit more flexible, for me personally, would keep me here a little longer. I've worked for Liberty 20 years, and I love Liberty, but other things come to play. I have an elderly grandfather that I take care of. He has a lot of doctor's appointments. It impacts me and my classroom because I have to leave to take him to these appointments as his guardian. So for me, it would really change the way I would look at staying. And I think any way that we can keep our teachers that we've put all this training into and this money and, have just given them the best of everything, that would keep them here to give them that time. I talk to my peers a lot, and my peers are definitely feeling some strains with trying to balance their work life with their home life, just because teaching just consumes you. If you are a good teacher, it just does. It consumes you because you want what's best for your kids in your classroom. So I think as Ms. Benitez over here, she spoke a little bit to that. We often take time on our weekends. So I think that would make a big difference. I do know that a lot of teachers are talking because there's so many districts that are starting to go to this that they're exploring that thought. And so I would hate to lose the staff that we've got and we've trained in that way too. So there's my teacher side of me. And then I'm just gonna add one quick thing is I have grandchildren that go to our school, and their parents are pilots and a nurse. So they already inherently work, 4 and 3 days work weeks anyway. So to them, they want this time to spend more with their children. So I think that's important too. I think one thing the pandemic did give to us was realizing how important family time is, and so that would give more family time, hopefully, to most families.
Ladies in the back, we haven't heard from you. Would you like to offer any comments on what you think about it and why? You don't have to, but we'd love to hear from you.
So I agree for the 4-day school time. I work Monday through Thursday, so I do have that Friday off. And it's the first time that I work this kind of schedule, so I see on Fridays we want to go, for the weekend out, and we want to go camping, or we want to go. So I kind of fall into that. My kids are absent on Fridays, So in this case, it gives us that liberty, and piggyback from it after the pandemic, we felt that family time, and then the kids went back to school, and it's like that anxiety, like, okay, when do we get family time again? We both work 4/10s, we get home, kind of try to do the homework and catch up and see what they're behind on. So I feel like that Friday will give us that family time where we can kind of see during the week where they fell behind school-wise and
work with them in, at home doing it in one-on-one with our kids. I have family members who their kids do have 4-day classes, and their grades have gone better. They say they have better attendance at school within their classmates. They look forward for that Friday. It's like their little gift, go to school Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, do your homework, and Friday you get to stay home. So I've seen it more of that positive side, but I do get those parents that will have to spend that extra money for daycare, so, yeah.
Excuse me. So as far as the teacher side, I do actually right now live in a community where they are at a 4-day school week, and the parents that my neighbors, they've gotten together and created like parent groups where I believe they are on a Monday, but where that Monday, they just swap houses for where their kids go. So my son is an adult, so I don't have to worry about that anymore. So that was just an idea that I have heard, and they do love having a 4-day week, just because they can go out and spend time with their family. And then as the teacher side, I give myself off Saturday. That's it. I give myself off Saturday, and I work all Sunday. And my husband hates it. He wants me to change jobs. And I don't, because I love teaching. And I love working with my kids. And it gets overwhelming with a lot of the paperwork that comes along on top of lesson plans. And I want to give my students the full focus, not just with my lesson plans, but being present as well. And instead of doing paperwork while they're working on Achieve, I want to be there. I want to be present. I want to be with them. So that one day will give me that time to get that paperwork done, and then on top of that, create those lessons and collaborate with my teammates so that those kids can enjoy that time and love coming to school. That's all I have to say.
Thank you. Other governing board members, do you have questions for the audience?
How's that? I think it's on. Dr. Stuff, did the committee at all look at what impact on attendance? Did student attendance increase percentage-wise, or did it decrease as they introduced the 4-day week?
Those of you out there have to help me remember. I believe that the research showed that it's too loud. Trying to talk to me. I thought it got better.
Yeah, it got better.
It, Okay, good. You were going down, and I was going to say up. I go, I'm saying the wrong thing here. No, I think my recollection from reading the research is that they found that attendance improved. Families that are in like club sports and travel, they're going to take off those Fridays. People doing 3-day weekends. We do have some of our community. They'll just take a family trip, and it doesn't matter whether they're in school or not. So that could get better. Yes, I mean, in talking with some of the other school districts, marginally, somewhat better there. Neither were a big increase, but it was not worse, right?
So my question, as we look at attendance, if we have if we offer a set number of hours, but a lot of our students are already missing that time, they're not really getting that. So if we look at the 4-day work week and attendance is better, I just question if we're actually getting more hours in the classroom because attendance is up. It would seem that would be So perhaps the 4-day work week, school week, work week, 4-day week actually brings more hours to the student as a whole versus them losing them by taking off Friday often.
It would depend on the student, but you're right, just on premise, if they miss days, then they're losing out on access to education. Our chronically absent children aren't just absent on Friday. They're, absent multiple days. But to your point, yes.
Do I have to press anything, or is it just automatic? I get the whole thing that some people work 4 days a week, nurses and teachers would have more time to prepare if they have the Friday off. I don't personally work at the moment, so I can't say it impacts me from that point of view at this point. That could change later on. But what does concern me is the day becomes long, because obviously you've got to tack on either earlier or later, probably later, I'm assuming. It would then, maybe finish at 4 p.m. or after 4:15, I don't know, depends how many minutes you add on. So now the day becomes very long. So a young child, because these are elementary children, for me it's elementary, so I just think it's a really long day for a young child, and I think obviously as the day goes on, they get more and more tired. So what are they really absorbing in the last 30 to 45 minutes? Probably not very much, because even for adults, we tend to learn better in the morning when we're wide awake, well rested, and our brain is, functioning at its optimum. And as the day goes on, we get more tired. It's just natural progression. So I don't really think they're going to learn, as much in the latter part of the day, to be honest. So I don't know if adding on more time really helps. I just think that they're going to be more tired, and then when they do come out of school, they're maybe not going to want to do as much in terms of extracurricular activities like sports or music or arts or, anything else that, they were doing before. And plus, because it's already late, wherever you have to go, that you're going to be possibly rushing to get to that activity and then rushing to get home to make dinner, get your child ready for bed, etc., for those 4 days. And yes, while it's great to have the Friday off, but from Monday to Thursday, I feel it's going to be kind of a little pressurized and stressed if there is anything you want to do after school. So that is a big concern for me, that the day becomes too long.
Great.
That's my opinion.
You summed up the committee's concerns about stamina and then,
Yes.
And access for extracurricular.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
Thank you for that.
All right. You're welcome.
Well, we're trying to do it in an unbiased way, so.
Use your mic. Okay.
Going to a 4-day, with how we see it right now, if I had looked at it, we're not going to school as long in the year, correct? In other words, the days in attendance are shorter by how many?
So when we were working with the committee, we just stuck with the start date and the end date of the school year that we're currently using, so matching up with Buckeye Union High School District. When I looked at it again, just saying, all right, I heard the interest for what would it look like to keep the instructional hours equal by adding one more day. In other words, instead of starting the school year on Tuesday, start on Monday. And you've got a Monday through Thursday week, and you just keep that consistency all year long except for 3 weeks during the year. That is still keeping the calendar year essentially the same for staff, and then for students, it's compacting the hours through Monday through Thursday and off on Fridays.
So I guess the question I have is was it work, because maybe I missed it, of if adding 2 days or 3 days as far as instructional days, can that bring down the amount of hours that the kids and staff is actually working, to the lady's point of to combat that fatigue, but to achieve the end goal at the same time?
Yes, we looked at some models of at 148 days and keeping it at, say 7.5 hours instead of 7 hours and 40 minutes. Ultimately, it's really a difference. It was really a difference just with a straight 7.5-hour day for 147 instructional days. It was a difference of 36 hours. And it's kind of offset by the number of hours of unusable time on Fridays anyway. That we were kind of breaking even there. If you did fewer, let's say you didn't do early releases for parent-teacher conferences, things like that, you can get a little closer, but I think that would be, hard. So yes, the answer is we can put up multiple models and show you as a board what that could look like.
One of my questions is about lunch, because I know the day is going to go super long, for these kids, which I'm all for 4 days. That's what I want for my kids. But like right now, they get out at almost 3 o'clock, and my son has lunch at 9:50 in the morning. So to add, are we going to push back the lunch time for these kids, because, that's super early for them now. So I can imagine, adding on a few more hours, not having snack time or anything like that. So what's the objective for lunch for this time frame that they're going to be in school?
We were looking at the same 40 minutes, 20 minutes for lunch, 20 minutes for recess, but shifting it more to the middle of the day of what the new day would be. I think the question is about what time would school start. So right now we have overall 2 school start times, a little variation from schools. And that's really driven by transportation, right? We can't have all of our schools start at 8 and finish at 3. That's why we have some at 7:30 to 2:30 and some 8:30 to 3:30. So that just means where we add on, let's call it an extra 30 to 40 minutes, where we add on that time is going to be dependent on if they're already in early school, well, how much earlier can they come in the morning? But if we start to make them, both schools, the same, then we have a problem. We don't have enough drivers and we don't have enough buses. So we'll have to figure that out, but essentially I'd say if you were in early school, pretend that you started maybe 5 minutes earlier, 10 minutes earlier, and then you have 20 minutes, you would go longer. We haven't modeled those, we just know that that's the true reality of what we'll have to do.
You might have already answered this idea, but if we keep the hours Monday through Thursday, not do long hours, but have shorter summers, because I feel like the summers is where the kids kind of go down in their learning, because there's most summers that we take it as vacation, not learning-wise. So if we have kind of shorter summers, but kind of keep the not so long days, I don't know if that has been, looked into.
It's certainly a consideration. Right? The committee we just didn't have enough time to delve into, and that didn't surface as an idea, but thank you for that.